The sun was high above the small western town when Caleb Morgan rode in from the plains. His shirt was dusty, his hat pulled low, and his mind only on selling cattle before dark. He was a quiet rancher, the kind who spoke little and worked hard, known more for his calm nature than for joining in the rough laughter of the saloon crowd. He didn't like noise, didn't like gossip, and never liked being the center of attention. But that day, everything changed because of a cruel joke that started with too much whiskey and too little kindness. At the saloon, a group of local men sat around a table, laughing too loudly and drinking too much. They noticed Caleb walking by, and one of them said with a smirk, "There goes the lonely rancher again. Maybe he needs a wife to keep him company." Another man answered, "Yeah, maybe that Chinese widow down by the old laundry could do. She's alone too." Laughter followed. Caleb didn't pay much attention at first. He just wanted to get his supplies and leave town. But the men kept talking louder, their laughter drawing others in. One of them stood up, waving a sheet of paper. "Let's have some fun," he said. "We'll make it official. Get him married to the widow today." The others cheered, thinking it was harmless fun. They didn't care that it would shame two innocent people. Before Caleb could react, they ran down the street, calling for the clerk and dragging the widow from her small shop. The woman was confused, her hands still wet from washing. Her dark hair was tied neatly, her face pale with fear. She spoke little English, only a few words here and there. She tried to pull away, but they surrounded her with mocking laughter. Caleb stepped forward then, his jaw tight. "That's enough," he said. "Stop this nonsense," but the clerk, half drunk and amused, decided to play along. "Let's make it quick," he said. "Rancher and widow, both single, both quiet. Sounds like a fine match." The crowd laughed louder. Caleb's protest was drowned in noise. The woman stood trembling, her eyes darting from one man to another, not understanding what was happening. When the clerk stamped the paper and called them husband and wife, the men cheered and slapped Caleb's back. He felt anger, not joy. He turned to them and said coldly, "You think this is funny?" But they only laughed more and walked away, leaving him standing there with the frightened woman beside him. The crowd faded, the laughter disappeared, and the street grew quiet again. Caleb looked at her. She was still holding the folded paper, her hands shaking. She didn't speak. The only sound was the wind. He took off his hat, ashamed of what had just happened. "Ma'am," he said softly, "I didn't ask for this. They meant it as a joke. You didn't deserve that." She looked at him with wide eyes but didn't answer. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to speak, but no words came. That evening, he found her standing outside his small ranch house, still holding that same paper. The sunset painted the land in gold and red, and she looked small against the vast open sky. He felt a deep ache in his chest. She had nowhere to go. If she returned to town, people would laugh again. No one would rent to her now. Everyone believed the marriage was real. "You can stay here for now," he said quietly. "Until I fix this." She looked uncertain but finally nodded. Her steps were light as she entered the little house. Inside she paused, glancing at the simple wooden table, the single chair and the small bed by the corner. The fire burned low in the stove, throwing soft light across the room. He pulled out a blanket and handed it to her. "It gets cold at night," he said. She hesitated, then accepted it with both hands and whispered softly, "Thank you." That night he slept in the barn, giving her space and peace. The sound of the wind outside carried a kind of loneliness he hadn't felt in years. He thought about her, the quiet fear in her eyes, the way she stood holding that paper as if it were something heavy. The next morning, he found the kitchen tidied and the fire already lit. She was kneeling near the stove, warming water. She looked up quickly and moved aside, as if unsure she was allowed to use his things. He smiled a little and said, "It's fine. You can." She nodded without meeting his eyes. For the next few days she stayed there. She cooked rice from a small tin she carried in her bag, and she cleaned the house with care. Caleb noticed that she worked quietly, almost silently, humming to herself in another language. It was peaceful to hear. He hadn't realized how long it had been since someone else's voice filled the house. He tried to go into town to fix things, but the clerk just shrugged. "It's legal enough," he said. "If you want to change it, get a divorce. But it'll cost you." The men at the saloon laughed again when he walked by. He ignored them, his jaw tight, but the shame stayed with him. When he came back that evening, the small house smelled of tea and something sweet. She had made a simple meal for both of them. When he sat down, she pushed the bowl toward him with a shy smile. "You work hard," she said slowly. "Eat." He looked at her, surprised by the kindness. "You didn't have to." She shook her head. "I want." It was the first time she'd spoken more than a few words to him. Her voice was soft, careful, almost like a song. He felt something shift inside him. She wasn't just the victim of a joke anymore. She was a person, strong, gentle, and real. That night he couldn't sleep. He sat by the fire, staring at the faint glow and listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing from the other room. He thought of how cruel people could be, how a single act of thoughtless laughter had brought her into his life, and yet somehow he didn't wish her gone. The next day he saw her outside trying to feed the chickens. She moved slowly, uncertain but patient. When she tripped on a loose board, he rushed to help her, but she only laughed softly at herself. That small laugh, warm and real, made something inside him ease for the first time in years. A few days later, he found her sitting behind the barn, her eyes red. She had heard the townsfolk laughing again, calling her names. She looked at him through tears and asked, "Why are they so cruel?" He wanted to tell her that people sometimes fear what they don't understand, but the words caught in his throat. "They don't know you," he finally said. She looked down, then asked quietly, "And you?" He hesitated only a second. "I want to know you," he said simply. She stared at him, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. Then a faint smile touched her lips, shy but full of something new. Hope, maybe. As the days went by, they began to understand each other more. She taught him a few words in her language. He showed her how to saddle a horse and carry water from the well. She wasn't afraid of work. When he came back from the fields, she'd be waiting by the doorway, a soft light behind her holding a bowl of tea. It became a quiet routine. Two people who never meant to share a life slowly learning how to. Sometimes he caught himself watching her when she worked, the way sunlight caught her dark hair, or how her face softened when she smiled. He tried to stop himself, telling his heart it was wrong. This was supposed to be fixed soon. But the more time passed, the more he realized he didn't want to fix it. The papers still lay on the small table by the window, folded neatly beside her few belongings. He could end it any time, yet each day he found a reason not to. The cruel joke that once humiliated them both was quietly changing into something else. He didn't know what to call it yet, but it felt alive, like spring grass after a hard winter. One night, as he stood outside watching the stars, he heard her singing softly inside. A sad but gentle tune in a language he didn't understand. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb Morgan felt peace. The mornings on the ranch grew warmer as spring slowly turned to summer. The air smelled of dry grass and sunlight, and the sound of horses carried across the open land. Caleb Morgan had grown used to seeing her every day now. Lynn May, that was the name she had finally shared with him one evening. She said it quietly, as if unsure she had the right to speak it aloud. "Leon means lotus," she had told him in her gentle way. "Flower that grows in dirty water but still clean." The way she said it stayed with him. Since then, he could not think of her as the widow or the woman. She was Leon May, graceful, strong and quiet like the morning light on the fields. She had slowly changed the rhythm of his days without either of them noticing. When he came home from work, the lanterns were lit, the fire warm, and the small house felt like a place that belonged to both of them. He found peace in her presence, in her soft laughter, her quiet steps, her careful hands. Leon May learned to help around the ranch. She rose early, carrying water from the well and feeding the hens. She even tried to mend fences with him, though the tools were too heavy for her small hands. When she dropped a nail or tripped on a loose plank, she laughed softly instead of crying. "I try," she said every time, and he smiled. One afternoon, he came home to find her hanging laundry in the wind. The sun lit her face, and a few strands of hair had come loose from her braid. She turned, caught his eyes, and smiled without saying a word. It was such a simple moment, yet it struck something deep in him, something he had forgotten he could feel. He tipped his hat, shy as a boy again, and went to help her with the basket. The town, however, had not changed. When Caleb went into the saloon for supplies, the men still whispered. They called her names, laughed at him for keeping her. "Guess he likes his joke too much to end it," one of them said. Caleb kept silent, but his hands tightened into fists. That evening, when he returned home, his mood was heavy. Leon May noticed right away. She set the table and poured tea, her eyes following him carefully. "You angry?" she asked softly. He sat down, sighing. "They keep talking," he said. "They don't stop." She stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "Let them. Words cannot break you." Her English was simple, but the strength behind her voice made him look up. She smiled faintly, though her eyes carried sadness. "I used to care," she said slowly. "When people in town look, I feel shame. But not now. You kind to me. You see me like person." He felt a warmth spread in his chest. He didn't know how to answer. So he just said, "You deserve better than what they say." The days passed, and life on the ranch continued with small routines that felt more like comfort than work. He showed her how to ride the old bay horse, and though she was nervous at first, she learned quickly. When the horse took its first few steps under her, she laughed, a light sound that made even the animals lift their heads. Caleb found himself laughing too, unable to help it. At night, when the stars came out, they sometimes sat outside on the porch, listening to the crickets. She told him about her husband. Not much, only that he had died of fever and that she had come here hoping for a new start. "He was kind," she said softly, "but gone too soon." Caleb listened quietly. He didn't ask more. Some pains didn't need words. One evening, a storm rolled over the plains. The wind howled and rain beat hard against the roof. The lantern went out and thunder shook the windows. Caleb got up to check the barn, making sure the horses were safe. When he returned, soaked through, he found her standing by the door with a blanket in her hands. She placed it over his shoulders without a word. Her fingers brushed against his neck, light as a whisper, and for a moment neither moved. He could hear her heartbeat in the quiet. He took her hand gently and said, "You don't have to be afraid. I'll keep you safe here." She looked up at him, eyes full of something between trust and disbelief. "I know," she said softly. After that night, something changed. They spoke more, laughed more, and the silence between them grew softer, not awkward. He began teaching her how to write her name in English, and she taught him to say a few words in her language. Their world was small, just the ranch, the fields, and each other, but it was peaceful. Then one day, while he was in town, a man at the saloon made a cruel remark about her again. Caleb turned, calm but firm, and said, "You don't speak her name again." The room went quiet. Everyone knew he meant it. The look in his eyes made even the loudest men fall silent. When he left, no one laughed. When he came home that evening, Leon May met him at the gate. She had heard what happened from the storekeeper's wife. "Why you angry for me?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. "Because they don't see you," he said. "They don't see who you are. They only see what they want to." She looked down, twisting her hands. "And you?" "I see you," he said. She looked up then, her eyes shining with emotion she couldn't hide. The wind blew softly around them, carrying the smell of grass and earth. The sky behind her was red with sunset. He took a step closer, slow and careful, not wanting to startle her. She didn't move. He reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. He leaned closer, not out of passion, but with quiet care, the kind of care that comes from respect. His lips met hers in the lightest of touches, gentle and uncertain. It was not like the bold gestures of stories. It was soft, honest, real. For a moment she froze, her eyes wide, her breath trembling. He pulled back instantly, afraid he'd frightened her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, but she shook her head slowly. Her voice was barely a whisper. No man ever gentle like that. Tears filled her eyes. No one. He touched her cheek softly, wiping one away with his thumb. "Then they were fools," he said. She smiled faintly, her tears turning into warmth. "Maybe joke become fate," she said. Her words were slow, careful, but full of feeling. After that night, the papers that once mocked them stayed folded neatly on the mantel. They no longer spoke of divorce. It was never needed. What began as a cruel trick had turned into something no one expected. A quiet love built from kindness, shared work, and understanding. The townspeople eventually stopped laughing. They saw how she walked beside him in the market, how he carried her baskets, how she looked at him with shy pride. The saloon men turned away when they passed, unable to mock what had become something true. At the ranch, the seasons kept changing. Leanne May planted flowers by the porch, and every morning they opened like small pieces of sunlight. Caleb built a new fence and fixed the roof. When he came in at night, she was always there, waiting with tea, her smile soft and welcoming. Sometimes they still talked about the day they met, how foolish it had all been. He would laugh and shake his head. "I never thought I'd thank those fools," he said. She would laugh too, her laughter bright and light as the breeze. "I never thought I'd forgive them," she answered. And when the evenings came and the sky turned gold over the open land, Caleb would look at her and feel something deeper than gratitude, the peace of knowing that even out of cruelty, something beautiful had grown. They never needed to explain it to anyone. The world could keep its gossip. They had found something real, something strong enough to outlast the laughter and the years. The ranch that once echoed with silence now carried the sound of two lives woven together, the creak of a rocking chair, the soft hum of her songs, and the quiet voice of a man who no longer felt alone. And every time he looked at her, he still remembered that first day, the cruel joke that changed everything, and the first kiss that had made her freeze not from fear, but from realizing that for the first time in her life, she was truly seen, truly safe, and truly loved.